animal chat time. Talk about narwhals today, which are amazing animals. When I got kicked off, when I came on again, I said I might need some narwhal magic. And the reason I said that was because people used to think that these unicorns of the sea were magical. I think they're pretty magical, and I have some pretty amazing facts for you coming up about them. Now, in medieval times, like I said, people thought they were magical. A really cool thing about them is people used to think when they would find their horns, they thought they were from actual unicorns. And so people would trade them and give them to kings and queens. And sometimes these narwhal tusks were so big that they were actually more expensive. They were worth more than whole castles. So that's how amazing people thought they were, and they still are. Now, a neat thing to think about is how big this tusk would be. So their tusks can be up to 10 feet long, which is about the size of an NBA basketball regulation hoop. So think about how big that must be. And if you had that in a castle, how amazing that would be. If you were a king or queen or prince or princess and you had that, you would say, look at this magical thing I have. I was in Italy a few years ago in Turin, and we went and visited a castle, and the tour guide actually said, look, we have unicorn horns. We don't know where we got them from, but they're from unicorns from ancient times, and they're still here. And I thought, that is so cool, and I love that. So I'll tell you more about what we know about narwhals now. Narwhals live in the Arctic Ocean. So I am going to do a couple screen shares with you to show you what we are looking at. Okay, so this is what a narwhal looks like. It is a whale. It looks kind of like a beluga. The beluga is its closest cousin, and then it has a big old tusk. And don't worry, we had tons of questions on the tusks, so I'm definitely going to talk more about those. This is them living together in their pods. You can see them swimming with a little tusk in front of them, and this is where they live. So this is the Arctic Ocean. So this right here is the very north of Canada. You can see Greenland and Norway and Russia. And so that is where narwhals live. Other whales will migrate all around the world, but these narwhals only migrate in the Arctic Ocean. Depending on the sea ice, they go from where there's really thick sea ice in winters, and then in the springs, they go where it's broken up a bit. And the really interesting thing about that is because they stay in the sea ice the entire time, they just always live in the cold weather. So in the summer times, about 90% of the narwhals live in Canadian waters, which is pretty neat. So right up in here, but they live all around. Here is a really good picture we'll come back to later that shows the tusk of the narwhal, and you can see its little eyes on the side. So you can see that it is a tusk. It isn't a horn like you'd see on a unicorn that has it out of its forehead. It's out of its mouth. And then there is a beautiful shot of narwhal just outside of Greenland. Yeah, so like I said, they live in Canada, Greenland, Norway, and Russian waters, and they are pretty big. So they're about 4,000 pounds, which means that they are the size of a pickup truck. So if you want to think about what that would look like in the water, think of like a pickup truck that has a big NBA basketball hoop on it. So that is how big they are when they're swimming around, which is like pretty neat to think about. Another really cool thing to think about is the fact that they live under sea ice for a lot of the year. So when you look at a narwhal, you remember they were really spotty and they were gray and had lots of colors to them. That's because they want to camouflage themselves under the sea ice. So predators don't see them and they can stay safe. And so if you are looking through the water when there's lots of lots of sunlight that's going over the sea ice, or if you're looking down through sea ice, you can't really see them because everything looks kind of dappled and looks a bit gray. So it's amazing, amazing they look that way. They also, if you notice, were very smooth on their back. They don't have a dorsal fin. So like what you'd see on a shark or an orca or even like a fish. And the reason they don't have those is because in the winter, when the sea ice is really thick, they actually break some of the sea ice so they can breathe through it. They breathe through a blowhole, which is at the very top of their backs. And so they don't have to put their face through the water. They just have to put their back up. So again, think about how big they are. It's like a big pickup truck that goes from the bottom of the ocean, swims up really quick, and hits the sea ice, and they can form cracks in the sea ice, and that's how they can breathe. So they can spend months underneath the sea ice. They never actually are in open water in the winter times, but because they're able to use their bony back that doesn't have a dorsal fin, they're able to breathe that way. If they did have a dorsal fin, it would hurt a lot to get their dorsal fin hitting the sea ice all the time. So it's pretty neat. They're magical for a lot of reasons, but they are perfectly adapted to live in these Arctic oceans, in these really cold areas. Someone asked how long they've been on Earth for, and that's a really cool question too, because we don't actually really know. The fossil record shows us 3 to 4 million years ago, there was something that looked kind of like a beluga, looked kind of like a narwhal, so it's probably from them, but we don't know how long narwhals existed, because finding fossils in the Arctic, under sea ice, under glaciers is actually really difficult. And so we don't know for sure. We do know that the close relatives have existed for a time. But I think it's amazing. It just shows you how more magical these animals are. They just, these unicorns have been around for a while. And it also shows you how amazing it is to be curious about the outside world. We don't know everything about animals on Earth, and I think that's super cool. So asking questions and being curious just leads to more answers. So a lot of people also wanted to know about the tusk, the unicorn horn of the narwhal. And so this is a super interesting part of it, because like I said, it's not like a unicorn horn, it's like a tusk. And so it's actually like a tusk like this. And so the neat part of it is it's a tooth, so it's like our teeth, but it is the left canine tooth. So the really, like the good chomper that you have, it's always the left tooth, that's the really big one. And it grows into like a spiral. And so the picture that I showed before, and I'll show it again, of the up close tusk makes it so you can see how spirally it grows. Now, their teeth are a little bit opposite to ours, that our teeth, if you hit your teeth, you can see that they're quite hard. Now, it's the opposite for narwhals, and this is so interesting. So at first, when people were learning about narwhal tusks, they thought, they must use them for hunting, they must use them for fighting, it must be a weapon. And the very first scientist that wrote a paper on this was in 1495. And this scientist said, I don't know what it does, but I think it does this, maybe? Now, we don't know for sure why they have the tusks, but there's been tons of studies out there saying, maybe it's this, oh, it actually can't be that. And one of the things we know is it can't be for fighting. Oh my gosh, I love your little signs that say narwhal. So we know it's not for fighting because we have seen, we're able to see that it's quite soft and porous on the outside. So our teeth are hard on the outside, soft on the inside, and it's opposite for narwhals. So the tusk is quite soft, and because it's soft, we're able to know they're not going to fight with it. they have about 10 million nerve endings in their tusk. So think about how much that would hurt if you were, you know, fighting with each other with having that many nerve endings in it. They've also seen that the tusk is quite porous, and so they are able to absorb water in their tusk, and it goes into their brain, into their the taste center of their brain. So what they're learning is from their tusk is how salty the water is. And by knowing how salty the water is, they're able to see what type of fish are going to be around. And so if it's really, really salty, they're at the bottom of the ocean, they know that there's going to be squid around. So they know that they should be hunting for squid. If they're in an estuary, which is where freshwater and saltwater meet, they are able to know there's going to be some Arctic cod or halibut around, and they know that's what they should be looking for. So it's really interesting. So we know that the tusk gives them tons of information. We also know, because it's so sensitive, they're able to see the temperature of the water. They're able to know how fast the water is moving, and they're also probably able to know if there are storms coming. So they can know, ooh, there's a storm coming, we should probably swim down and hide from it for a little bit. They can swim down to the very bottom of the Arctic Ocean, so about 1 kilometer-ish, which is pretty far, and they can hold their breath for about 25 minutes. And so that means, like I said before, when they're under sea ice for months, they do have to make sure they break that sea ice so they can breathe every 25 minutes. Another really interesting part to know about their tusk is their tusk, so it can be the size of that basketball net, right? Which is pretty cool. Now, some will have 2 tusks. Generally, they don't get very big, but the tusk can be about 30 centimeters, which is about the size of a ruler. So that's still pretty big. If I had a tooth that was the size of a ruler, be big enough for me. But that would be about the size of a unicorn horn. So it makes it a little bit more magical. Another really amazing thing that I think about their tusks is most of the time, pardon me, most of the time it's the males that have tusks, but sometimes females do. And because we don't know a lot about the tusks, we don't know why some females do, and sometimes females have 2 as well. And I think it's so amazing because these narwhals are super social creatures. They live in pods. Sometimes their pods, their families are 5. Sometimes they can be more than 1,000. And narwhals don't care what they look like. They don't care if boys have tusks or girls have tusks. They accept everyone into the pod. And I think that is so nice. And I think we can learn a lot from narwhals being so accepting to each other. Another really amazing thing about their tusks is recently, in 2017, so pretty recent in science, WWF was doing some research up in the far north in Canada, in Nunavut, and they saw, using drone footage, they saw that a narwhal was fishing, and it hit a fish with its tusk, and then it ate it. So narwhals actually don't chew their food because their one tooth, not really good for chewing, and they don't skewer their food because they have quite small fins, so they can't get the food off of their tusk. And so we thought that they don't use it for hunting at all, but then suddenly this drone footage saw them swat a fish and then eat it. Now, what they do is called suction eating. So it's kind of like a vacuum or a Hoover. They just it up. They eat the fish in one go. And so it's, you know, good for hunting if you can like hit the fish and go done, or squid, whatever it's eating. And so What was interesting about this was what WWF has tons of people around the world, and they do really great cooperation with locals. And they were talking with the Inuit and Innu people of the area, the people that live in the far north, and they said, oh, wow, we just saw this amazing thing that this narwhal did. And the Innu people who've been living with Inuit and Innu people that have been living with narwhals for thousands of years said, oh yeah, we knew that, we saw that, we thought you knew. And I think it's so great for another lesson for us to know that communication between all communities, between all people, is really important, because we were able to record it, and that's awesome. And then we're able to look at people in the community and say, you've been living with these animals, can you let us know that this happened, that this is true? And they said, yeah, no, for sure. And so we can know just a little bit more about their tusks and what they do with it, which is pretty neat. Let's have some questions. I know that there's a bunch of questions in the chat.
Laura, there was one question about the narwhal who has 2 tusks. Why would some have 2? What makes some have 2 when it's more normal to have, more frequent to have 1?
Yeah, actually, it's a really good question. So the short answer is we don't actually really know why one would have 2, because they're not used for fighting, and because they're not used for fishing. It's not like evolution would mean there should be more or they should be bigger. It might just be one of those weird flukes. Sometimes we get animals that just look a bit different. A really cool part about that is even when there are narwhals that have like a broken tusk or 2 tusks, they're always still in the pod. So there's never a time that the narwhals look around and go, oh, you look a bit different, you shouldn't be part of our family. And I think that's really cool. So we don't know why that would happen, but we do know it doesn't really affect them at all. They're still, knowing that they have 2 tusks also means they can still eat just fine, which is nice, because they're still sucking up all the squid and things that they have to eat. That's a great question.
I see one about, does their tusk only fall off when they die?
Oh, yeah, that's a cool question. So the reason that we are able to know that narwhals have existed for, more than 1,000 years is we're able to see fossils of them. And so just like you would see a fossil of a dinosaur that still has the teeth in its mouth, or you see like a skeleton of an elephant that has the tusks out, it's the same with narwhals. Their tusks are connected to the bones in their head. So they are, so they all stick together. So seeing a narwhal skull is actually really cool. Is the tusk super sharp? That's a good question. Harlow. So they're not sharp. They're really soft and squishy, actually, because seawater can get in and they're tasting the water with their tusk. They don't get sharp at all, and because they don't fight with their tusks at all, there's nothing sharpening them. We used to think that narwhals dug up the seafloor looking for food with their tusks, but we found out they probably don't do that. So they don't, so there's nothing that would really make the teeth really sharp. Oh, that is a great question. Their tiny eyes are not very good at seeing. And that's why having the tusk is so important, because their tusk, oh, look at those narwhals. Those look so good. You guys are so good at drawing narwhals. I should have had you draw me a narwhal for my presentation. But so their eyes, it's really hard to see underwater. And so if you open your eyes when you're swimming in a lake or even like in the bathtub, things can look kind of blurry and a bit hard to see. And so that's why the camouflage of the narwhal is so good, because other animals in the water look at them and say, is that just a bunch of gray? Yeah, probably it's a bunch of gray, it's fine. And it's the same with these narwhals. And so instead of having to see with their eyes, they use their big tusk to really understand the environment around each other. They also use echolocation. So they do like clicks and like little trumpet noises. If you've seen Dory, they do sort of be like, ooh, to look for things, but it's more ooh, and then when the sound waves come back from the water, their tusks pick it up. So they're able to really understand the water around them and what ocean currents are around, what fish are around, what predators or what squid might be around for them to eat. They're able to see that through their tusk and all the information that they're getting from their tusk. So it's a good question about their eyes. Their eyes are important, but not as important as that big old tooth they have.
Nora, what would be the one or two things that you would want us to take away from today and remember about narwhals?
I think a really important thing to know about narwhals is right now they're not endangered. And that is such a lovely thing to say. Like, such an incredible unicorn of the sea isn't endangered, and we want to keep it that way. So the reason that narwhals survive so well is they're able to stay under sea ice, which protects them from really big predators like orca whales or Greenland sharks and things like that. And so making sure that the sea ice stays thick and stays cold is the most important thing. So if you want to protect narwhals, you need to protect their ecosystem and where they live. And that means really thinking about climate change and really doing your very best to make sure that you are turning lights off, and you're when you're not socially isolated, you are walking around rather than driving your car and things like that. So when you hear climate change and you hear things like making responsible decisions for the environment, it's for you and the animals in your backyard, but also for the narwhals in the Arctic.